Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
And I'm Alex.
Hey, Alex, how's it going today?
It's going well. Another day recording and another day to talk about football.
And what a week we've had. The 2023 NFL Draft is in the rear view, and we're back to our normal Thursday recording. As always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our posts and our videos. And please subscribe to us on socials. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter with the handle at N2EFantasy. So, Alex, what do we got on today's show?
All right. Today is all about the draft. We got our full recap on some of the intriguing skill position players of this draft. So we're not going to go over every single pick. We are going to go over the most fantasy relevant players. So, like wide receivers, running backs, tight ends. We're just going to go down the list.
Well, let's get it started. First, I want to say that there were 6 trades in the first round after the draft started, which is pretty hefty, a lot more than I thought there would be. I think you thought very close to that number, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, we were talking about some people thought it might not be that good of a draft, that there may only be 15 to 17 players worth a first round pick. So that indicates that teams might want to trade up for their guy or the last player that they think is a first round grade. It made sense that they would do a bunch of trades. And I'm glad I was right about that.
Yeah, and there were almost more trades at the end of the round one, and they just didn't come through.
Well, Jeff, you also made a prediction that only three quarterbacks would be taken in the first round, and you were correct. You didn't get all three of the correct quarterbacks, but you were correct about the number.
I was, and we'll get to where I was incorrect on that as well. But the team with the number one pick, the Carolina Panthers, they selected Bryce Young at number one, and they get their quarterback, and they get their franchise quarterback for the next several seasons.
Pretty safe pick. Everyone assumed that's what it was. People tried to create some drama by saying no, it really is going to be CJ Stroud. No, they're going to go Anthony Richardson because they just want stuff to talk about. But it was probably always going to be Bryce Young. I don't think you and I wavered since that first broke that it was going to be Bryce Young, and it turned out to be the pick. And they followed that up with getting him a wide receiver to potentially replace the production from DJ Moore and Jonathan Mingo and high in the second round. He could potentially develop as a wide receiver one behind Chark and behind Thielen.
So I think Mingo is going to open the year as the number 4 wide receiver for the club. And I think it's a wide receiver for Bryce Young to grow with. And I don't see Thielen being a super long term deal. Shark's a 1 year deal. Marshall is heading into year 3, so he's only got 2 years left on his deal. So there's going to be some opportunity for Mingo to really be the wide receiver one for this ball club. And it will be interesting to see if he can do that sooner rather than later. But I do project him opening up as the wide receiver four for Carolina. I know you were very high on Mingo, though, on your pre draft rankings.
I really like Mingo. I think he's got a lot of promise, and it's going to be hard to beat out Chark and Thielen year one. We don't know exactly what Marshall is yet. Marshall could be the future wide receiver one or two, probably as high as a two, in my opinion. But I think Mingo is the one that has the potential to potentially be the lead receiver for the Panthers. But it's a nice group to have for a fresh quarterback into the league in Bryce Young. It could really help him develop as a pro and give him some targets to throw to.
Yeah, offensively, they're looking up. And speaking of offensively looking up, the number 2 pick came from the Houston Texans. And there was a lot of suspense and drama with this pick. And I know that they could have went several different ways with either defense, trading it, quarterback. Who did they end up with, Alex?
Well, you and I had talked about previously, it's either going to be probably be CJ Stroud or be Will Anderson. And we thought the more likely was Will Anderson. And I think that that's originally what they were going to do. But I think the decision came down to who is going to be easier to trade up for at three. If Stroud's there at three, other teams might get more involved. So they took the safer pick, Stroud first, and then they traded up for Will Anderson right in front of the Colts pick. It was an interesting scenario. I'd seen that scenario come up. I didn't think it was a guarantee to happen, so I didn't mock it, and it happened. So, as a Texans fan, I'm mostly happy with what they did. I am considering the ramifications that we ensured that Anthony Richardson would be available for the Colts at 4, and that may come back to bite the Texans if he turns out to be better than CJ Stroud.
Absolutely. Stroud was in the conversation at 1 for a while there, and in fact, I think some of our mock drafts had him going 1 overall in the very beginning. And I think eventually we moved him to the 2 spot, but then we were talked out of having him in the 2 spot just because of the news and rumors that were going around and swirling. And it was really funny that the Texans decided to trade up for the rumored number 2 pick at the number 3 slot after they had taken the quarterback at number 2. So it feels like the Texans got the best of both worlds in this draft. But what was really interesting is CJ Stroud asked the Texans to draft a wide receiver, and they actually listened to him. Who did they grab, and how do you feel about him?
They took a local guy in Tank Dell, who goes to U of H. Was very dynamic, a little bit short, wide receiver, but he is very good. He is pretty close to a similar receiver that Stroud had, and that was receiver Jackson Smith and Jigba that he had in basically 2021, not really so much 2022, who was clearly already going to be gone because he was taken in the first round. So Tank Dell is the next best thing to that kind of position. I'm thrilled both as someone who went to U of H and live in the Houston area that Tank Dell got drafted by the Texans and now has a very promising quarterback to throw to him in the pros.
Right. And so far with Tank Dell, I have him as the number 4 wide receiver for the Texans entering camp behind Woods, Mechie, and Collins. Do you agree with that assessment?
It's kind of difficult because the way that they're hyping it now, he may eventually be the primary wide receiver, which would be weird with his size. I'm not sure how much Robert Woods has left at this point. He's going to be healthy this year, a lot more healthy than he was the previous year. So Robert Woods could be a heavy contributor. We don't know what Mechie is yet because he's coming off recovering from leukemia, and Collins has disappointed to date. Granted, he has not had great quarterbacks to play with. So now with Stroud, can he elevate Collins? Can Robert Woods bounce back? Can Mechie show up on the field after his recovery? It's going to be interesting to see how these wide receivers play out. I can see virtually any of them being the number one option, but considering that Dell was asked for explicitly by Stroud, that's very positive for him potentially leading the pack at some point.
There's got to be something there.
Yeah.
So moving on to the Colts, Anthony Richardson, as you had mentioned, goes 4 to them, and they also grabbed a number 3 receiver in Josh Downs. Then the reason why I stretched that out is because he probably could challenge Pierce to be the number 2. First, what do you feel about the number 4 pick with Richardson, and then how do you feel about his new weapon in Downs?
Well, it's interesting because we didn't think that the Texans were going to have two picks back to back in the first round. So we thought Stroud might make it to Indianapolis and he might have been the number one choice for them. Or we thought Levis could be the choice for them because there was a lot of smoke there. That looks like it was only the owner, and the owner actually let his front office draft who they wanted. And it turned out to be Anthony Richardson. And we just missed that because the head coach was tied to Jalen Hurts, and we didn't think that Hurts was necessarily his quarterback style of choice. But when you look closer at who he hired as a quarterback coach in Cam Turner, who previously coached Cam Newton for a few years and coached Kyler Murray for a couple of years. he's more of a mobile quarterback coach. So it makes total sense that they would actually have taken Anthony Richardson, which is something that I regret not looking closer into. So now the question is, since that's what the coaching staff is, they have their head coach who worked with Hertz, their quarterback coach who worked with Cam Newton and Kyler Murray, are they going to want to start Gardner Minshew year one? I know you love Gardner Minshew, but Anthony Richardson, someone who he needs to get out there and throw to improve his accuracy and to show he deserves to be a franchise quarterback. So I don't know if Minshew is really going to get a chance. Jeff, what do you think? Do you think Minshew will end up starting this whole year, or what's your thoughts there?
So I think that Minshew should start this year because I do think Richardson does need some time to marinate on the bench and work out his kinks in practice without actually being hit and losing his confidence and being in the limelight while he tries to work it out. But using a number 4 pick, I do think they'll move on to Richardson quicker than they would have if he went a little bit later. So it may rush his development, it may hurt his confidence. Will it work? We'll find out. But if we look at Jalen Hurts, he wasn't forced to start year one, at least not initially. I think he came in and might have had a spot start or something when Wentz went down, but there wasn't that pressure on him to start right out of the gate. So,
Well,
and I
Wentz
think,
was a top two pick.
right.
So they had all the pressure to keep Wentz starting. Hurts was only brought in as an upside backup, and then he ended up starting. So it's a different scenario. But Jeff, you had Richardson not being taken in the first round, and he got
You,
taken fourth overall.
you are
You
correct.
you gonna change any opinions on that, or are you still withholding until he actually plays?
I need to see it to believe it at this point. And you mentioned that Wentz was a number 2 pick, and Minshew is a number 2 pick in my heart. So,
But one of the guys that you really liked, Josh Downs, going there. How do you see him playing? Whether it's Minshew or whether it's with Richardson, do you think he's going to put up the numbers that you had hoped for? What do you see for his outlook with the Colts?
yeah, I don't see the numbers that I'd hoped for in year one, but honestly, Indy is looking for weapons, and he's a weapon for them, and he's going to have opportunity because he's competing with McKenzie and Pierce to get onto the field opposite of Pittman. That's not a scary depth chart that he has to supersede to get into the game. So, still like his opportunities to be there.
I think he's a really good complement to Pittman. Pittman's more of the big catch guy rather than the speedy under guy who can move in the slot, move on the outside. I think Pierce might move down to the third wide receiver. I know a lot of fantasy people really push Alec Pierce as being an up and comer. I don't really see it with him yet. And I think Josh Downs is a serious threat to him personally. And I think Josh Downs will work really good with this offense, assuming that they actually pass a lot and they don't do a very run heavy kind of offense with Richardson.
Agreed. Speaking of run heavy offenses, it looks like Atlanta is going to be a run heavy offense again this year. And they went number 8 at Bijan Robinson. That is kind of crazy, right?
It is, and I have to say that is a very nice natural transition there. That was very well done. I I think it's very strange to take a running back at 8 overall. I know you and I have talked repetitively about the value of running back in the first round, and they went old school and took Bijan Robinson, who was the best running back prospect at number 8 despite having Tyler Algier on the roster who ran for 1,000 yards last year. But if you look at the numbers, they were a very heavy run offense last year. They already have a very good run blocking offensive line. Mariota is no longer starting and no longer taking carries. They will have a bunch of carries available for Bijan and Algier, I think, especially with I don't think they've re-signed Cordero Patterson. So they will have enough for two running backs to have fantasy value. I don't know if that means that Bijan breaks into the top 5 as so many people expect, or if Algier still eats up a bunch of carries. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. They clearly want to run the ball.
Yeah. So as you know, I'm working on projections for the draft picks and trying to fit them into their teams. Projections as well. So right now, I do have Bijan at RB12, like going into this year. So for redraft leagues, which that makes him an RB1 going into year one. So I do have high expectations for him. And yes, Algier has fallen quite significantly based on the capital that went into the pick for Bijan.
I think I would have Bijan in the top 10 at this point, but I'm not exactly sure where without really looking at it.
Wow, you're taking him over Mixon?
I have to really look at the running backs this year because there's some movers for sure.
I'll tell you the reason why I wouldn't take Bijan over Mixon right now is because I do believe in Joe Burrow and I do believe the quarterback opens up lanes for the running back as well. And I believe in Burrow over Ritter any day of the week.
I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think the Falcons' offensive line's in better shape, but other than that, the Bengals have the better pass catching options. They did improve their offensive line a little bit in free agency. They have a top 5 at minimum quarterback. You can argue exactly where he lands, but I love Burrow personally. So, I can see Mixon still being valuable, especially since they didn't take anyone to supplant him. So that's quite nice. But moving on to another running back that was taken. This one wasn't as high, but he's high in my heart. The Chicago Bears in the fourth round took Rashawn Johnson at 115. I love Rashawn Johnson. I don't think he could have gone to a better spot. He's got Khalil Herbert. Herbert is a big play waiting to happen, but struggles in the pass game, especially pass blocking explicitly. So I don't think Herbert is a 3 down back. I think Rashawn Johnson is. So I think Rashawn Johnson could start at some point this year. I don't think they're going to give it to him. I think he's going to have to earn it. But Herbert hasn't done anything to make me trust him. I love Rashawn Johnson a lot. And let's not forget the Chicago Bears relied heavily on another University of Texas running back in Cedric Benson. So that
That's
could
true.
be reminiscent of that time period.
Don't forget they did sign Deontay Foreman as well, so he will have to pass Foreman and Herbert up the depth chart. So he'll probably start off as running back 3. Speaking of a running back that will not be playing special teams at all, Jameer Gibbs at number 12 to Detroit. They would have taken him at 6, but here's another running back going in the top 12. Will he be the lead back on this team?
Well, it's very interesting that they said that he potentially would have been the pick at number 6. That would have been in front of Bijan Robinson, which is interesting. I know you and I like Gibbs a lot, may even like him more than Bijan in our hearts because he's more versatile in both of our opinions and more electric. But he was not considered widely as being better than Bijan, so that's interesting. But they clearly like the throwback to Sanders. They clearly like the Kamara role as the head coach is from that system. He's a better version of Swift. So, at a minimum, he'll fill the role that Swift was supposed to fill. And it really hurts my heart that David Montgomery is now going to have a more limited role than I had hoped for. But I really like Gibbs. I think Gibbs is going to be involved heavily. He has to be since he was picked 12th overall. They would look like fools if they didn't use him early. It's just going to be what's the carry percentage between the two running backs. Maybe you think maybe 60-40, or what do you think the
So
usage is?
I think Montgomery could get up to 40%, but there was just some breaking news that came through that Gibbs was told that he will be playing slot receiver more than he was in college. So he will be playing slot, which opens up the more running back snaps for Montgomery.
So both of these guys could be heavily used, is what you're
Yes.
saying.
Yes, especially with Jamison Williams suspension. Moving on to pass catchers for Detroit, Sam Laporta, number 34 to Detroit. He's got to slide into the number one role immediately, right?
I would think so, and I had him very highly rated on my list that we did right before the draft. He's someone that I really like, and with the draft capital that high in the second round, I believe that they traded up for him. I think with that high of a pick, he's going to get used quite a lot. He's going to have more of a prominent role because I don't know how they're going to trust Jameson Williams. Coming back from an injury and a gambling suspension, those are two pretty big red flags. And Jameson Williams is more of a speedy guy, so I could see Sam Laporta getting a lot of underneath balls from the tight end position.
Agreed. He's going to kind of compete there with Amaran St. Brown. It's just they're going to kind of overlap a little bit in their skill set. So it'll be interesting to see where they both fit in together. And rounding out Detroit's picks, they picked Hendon Hooker at 68. Is this somebody like breathing down Goff's neck? Do you think he's too old for a project? What do you think about Hendon?
I think he's old for a project. He's going to be 25, 26 coming into the league year. But at the same time, he's not ready to play a pro offense. And Goff still has 2 years left on his deal. I think Goff has a year to prove that he's still good and he'll get a contract extension because they've already talked about him being an option for a contract extension. If he is as consistent as he was last year or even takes any kind of steps forward, they'll probably re sign Goff to an extension. If not, then they have Hendon Hooker, who they could develop to be Goff's replacement sooner rather than later. So it's an interesting gamble for them. It's kind of a motivator for Goff, and it gives them some kind of protection if Goff gets hurt or if Goff's play drops off. I think that's pretty smart, and they're not going to be drafting high next year, is my opinion. So it benefits them to make this gamble.
Agreed. And I think it gives them a cheap backup. And I think they had a luxury of picks. Look at what they did with their first pick at running back. And I think they just burned off some of these picks on some of the players that kind of fell because they're more luxury picks than they are great NFL picks.
And that's a good point, Jeff. With the cheap backup quarterbacks, it seemed to be a theme this draft as well because a lot of these teams drafted quarterbacks in the early and mid rounds. And I think that there was a record 11 quarterbacks were taken in the first 150 selections, 12 were taken in the first 5 rounds altogether. I'm pretty sure that was a record for the NFL draft. And it comes down to the starting quarterbacks are getting these crazy huge contracts. No one wants to use that money for the backup position. So where can you get cheap backups, cheap, decent backups? And that's the NFL draft. And it's a whole new world with the way that it's shaken out.
Agreed. So one of those quarterbacks that got a good contract was Geno Smith, and now he has a new weapon to throw to and a new running back to hand off to. What's your thoughts on Jackson Smith and Jigba to Seattle at 20? And then also they drafted Charbonnet. So they have like the two hardest names to say in the draft, and they grabbed him at 52. So we expect JSN to be like a number 3 wide receiver to start off. Is that correct?
He has the toughest road to getting targets of the wide receivers that were drafted early, in my opinion. He has to be the third because Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf are really good. But Njigba was arguably the best wide receiver of the entire draft class. I don't see him not getting targets. You've pointed out that Tyler Lockett could be moving on at some point in the near future. And so Njigba and DK Metcalf would be a really good 1-2 combo for the franchise. And Charbonnet as the backup for Kenneth Walker, but being really good quality depth behind him and someone who could potentially supplant him in a couple years. Those are really good for the organization, not so great for fantasy because we all wanted someone like Jackson Smith and Jigba and Zach Charbonnet to go to a place where they could start quicker and have an easier path, and they did not. They went to where someone was already holding that spot. So it's going to be interesting how these position battles shake out. Seattle didn't really go after a tight end, so I can envision them going three wide receiver sets a lot. And they clearly trust Geno Smith because they did not take a quarterback, although I will insist that they really wanted Richardson, and the draft room was very hectic after the Colts took him in front of them. I think it's going to be interesting for them, and Pete Carroll is probably going to be there for a few more years because that's a very talented offense right now.
Yeah, I can see that as well, and I could see Charbonnet and Walker becoming a nightmare 50-50 split as soon as the back half of this season for fantasy owners. I thought Kenneth Walker was due for a breakout year two, and now I'm not as excited about him. But moving on to a guy that you were not that excited about at all for the draft, Quentin Johnston. He went 21 to the Chargers, and it kind of feels like he's going to slide into that three role immediately. What's your thoughts on him now with his landing spot?
I'm not super thrilled because Addison was available, and I really thought all the links would tie him to the Chargers, but they went with Johnston. It was probably the best spot to go to considering who the offensive coordinator is, and they have a really good quarterback. He also does something a little bit different than what Keenan Allen and Mike Williams provide. Keenan Allen's that sure possession wide receiver and does a lot of underneath. Mike Williams is the big play, jump up and catch it kind of wide receiver. Johnston, to me, is more of a catch and run wide receiver that brings a lot of speed. I think he's faster than the other two wide receivers. If they design certain plays for him, he will be pretty useful in that offense. And I just think that fantasy owners need to take it with a grain of salt because he's not going to get that many receptions. It's all going to be big plays.
Right.
I think people need to scale back expectations on him.
I could see him contributing in year one, and we will see if he can make that leap, that growth into a wide receiver in the NFL. But Allen's getting up there in age. Williams is always injured, and he could quickly find himself if he works out into a wide receiver one position with one of the best quarterbacks in the league.
It's also interesting for Johnston because if he develops as a pass catcher and uses his full size catches away from his body, doesn't cradle every catch, he can be a true number one. But he is also going to a quarterback who's fairly good, fairly accurate, who can throw the ball to him like right on the spot. So it's a really good spot for Johnston, and it's up to him whether or not he can actually be a wide receiver one in the league.
Right, and we're in kind of the middle of a run here of wide receivers. We had Zay Flowers 22 to Baltimore and Jordan Addison 23 to Minnesota. What's your thoughts on where they kind of fit in with their teams and how do you think about their fits?
Zay Flowers was one of the players the Baltimore fans really wanted, and it's someone who apparently Lamar Jackson wanted them to take as well. So they're both happy. He gets a quarterback who signed his huge contract before the draft, and he gets to go play with OBJ, and he probably supplants Rashad Bateman at this point because Rashad Bateman has not put the production up in the league. I really love Flowers. I wish he'd gone to a different system, clearly, because I really wanted him to go to the Chiefs. But if this new offense is more pass happy, and if Lamar Jackson actually will throw to wide receivers now that he has a better wide receiver group, Flowers could be a really good steal for people in redrafts and especially for dynasty owners. So I like him a lot, and talent wins out. If Lamar Jackson stays healthy and throws to his wide receivers, Flowers is going to put up big stats.
And what about Jordan Addison, now the number two to Jefferson?
I think he's a perfect complement to Jefferson and clearly supplants KJ Osborne as the number two there now that Thielen's gone. I think it helps Jefferson. Jefferson's still going to get double covered probably in every game he plays in, but it gives Kirk Cousins an outlet to throw to outside of Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. so they can keep the chains moving. And it's eventually going to help Jefferson be more efficient because if they can keep the chains moving, the offense is still on the field and Jefferson will get the ball. So I really like it for Minnesota. I think Jordan Addison's a really good, polished route runner. There's not a lot to dislike here at all.
Right, and that kind of ends our first round wide receivers that had went. We did have one more first round pass catcher that went though with Dalton Kincaid to Buffalo. Does seem like Buffalo wanted one of those wide receivers, and once the wide receivers were gone, they kind of pivoted to another type of pass catcher. What do you think about Dalton Kincaid here?
Well, he was both of our number one tight ends coming into the draft. And I think he's a really, really good receiving tight end. It sounds like they're going to put him out and use him as a wide receiver a lot. And it does give them something else to throw to besides Diggs. Gabe Davis has been very spotty. It does affect Knox a little bit, but I don't think it's actually going to be as bad as feared because they don't really have a wide receiver too. So I think the tight ends are going to get a lot of work. I really like Dalton Kincaid. I do wish that he went somewhere where there wasn't already a tight end that would threaten him. But he's going to get targets, and I think Knox is going to get some targets. But Knox is not going to be a tight end one for people in fantasy.
Right. I kind of agree with that. I do see Knox coming down from his TE1 that I thought he was going to be, and now he's going to probably be a tight end two going into this upcoming year in redraft. But I also think Kincaid will be a tight end two as well. So it will be interesting to see how they employ a two tight end 12 personnel set. Now the Tennessee Titans grab the fourth quarterback, but this happens to be with the second pick in the second round. So this is kind of what made me right with those three quarterbacks in the first round. Will Levis went at 33 and Tajay Spears went to at 81 to the Titans. So does this mean an end for Tannehill? Does this mean an end for Derrick Henry? What are you thinking on both fronts there?
I think it spells the end for their time at Tennessee. I don't know whether it's after this year or whether they're traded before or during the year. I don't think Tennessee is going to be very good this year. I know that's hard to say because a couple years ago they were the division leaders, but the
The
team,
one seed.
yeah. I mean, I think Patrick Mahomes was hurt during the regular season that year. So
I
Tennessee,
think Henry was hurt that year too, though.
Henry,
Yeah, I think that was the year with the broken foot, and they were still the one seed.
I don't know. I don't. I love Henry a lot. I just see his time coming to an end as a top five running back. I don't know if it's this year or if it's next year, but he's going to be 29 this year. He's going to be 30 when his contract's up. So he's already over the hill for running back ages in the NFL. They would benefit from moving on from him. They would probably get a higher pick than a compensation pick for letting him walk. Tannehill was in a lot of rumors about potentially being traded before or during the draft. It didn't happen. Now they have someone to potentially mentor, Will Levis, but at some point they're going to struggle and they're going to turn to Will Levis to see what they have in that quarterback. And Tannehill's expendable from that point. So I think both of them are potential trade candidates probably during the season.
Yeah, and I think that I mean obviously it depends how successful the Titans are throughout the year. If they're being successful, then they're not really going to trade either of them.
I mean, they could be a surprise like the Seahawks. We could be spelling their doom, and then all of a sudden they have a phenomenal year.
They could be.
It-
They could be. And we could be writing the end to players a little prematurely. I do think Levis is a bit of a project, and we could find out that that project is bad very quickly, and then Tannehill's back in real quick.
Almost like the quarterback they took the previous year, Malik Willis. Thought he was had a lot of talent, and he played and wasn't very good. So
Yeah, and we've all seen it time and time again. I know that there's folks out there that both you and I know that have been calling the end of Travis Kelsey for a few years now, and they've been wrong year after year. So I think you could be that with Henry, though.
I mean, I like Henry. I don't ever want him to get old. He is always and forever King Henry, but his run at Tennessee has probably come to an end. That's
Po-
just my guess.
possibly. Possibly. All right, so we have the Las Vegas Raiders up next. They picked Michael Mayer, who was actually projected to be the top tight end by a lot of people. And do we believe that he's an upgrade on Waller?
I would think so. I think he's a upgrade as a blocker, and I think he's actually a very talented receiving tight end as well. I think Waller is one dimensional in that regard, and they get Michael Meyer for real cheap. So I think it's a win for them with, as you pointed out to me, they're very cheap owner, so they don't have to pay big bucks to a tight end, and they got someone for Jimmy Garoppolo to throw to on those underneath routes, as well as the receivers that they have in that unit now. So I think it's pretty good draft pick for them. They traded up for him, so they clearly want to use him.
Absolutely. So that'll be a good move. And I do think he's a better blocker than a pass catcher. And I think that's why he wasn't the first tight end taken in the draft. So I think from a fantasy standpoint, he might be a little slight downgrade on peak Waller, but we will see what he does with Jimmy Garoppolo over time. They also grabbed Trey Tucker at 100. Not really much to talk about there, but worth noting that they grabbed him and just another pass catcher to throw into that wide receiver room that they have right now that seems jam packed.
He seems like a gadget piece that's very athletic and is going to be moved around, but I don't foresee fantasy relevance unless some wide receivers move on from that group. So
Yeah, they're going to have some serious cuts to make in August. But speaking of a room that's jam packed, it's going to be the Green Bay Packers, and they added three pretty legitimate weapons to the room for Jordan Love in his first year as a starter in Green Bay. So we have Luke Musgrave, we have Tucker Kraft, and we have Jaden Reed here going. What are your thoughts on these three? Do you think this is a major upgrade for
I think the Packers love Jordan more than Aaron, is what I think.
him?
Two different tight ends. Green Bay has struggled finding consistently good tight ends. Tunyon hasn't really been great. The options that they've had since maybe Jermichael Finley had a couple good seasons, they haven't really had anyone. They doubled up at the tight end position with two highly rated tight ends in a year of really good tight ends. So Luke Musgrave and Tyler Kraft. One of them is probably going to be good. I don't know which one it's going to end up being. Maybe both of them, but then if they're both good, are they both tight end ones? That's another question. Jaden Reed was not really up there in my top 2025. I know he's very fast and teams draft speed. I think he's pretty well rounded and dynamic, and he can play all over and play as a blocking wide receiver too for some plays. But I don't know if he's that polished as a route runner. I think he's got a lot to work on his route tree. But I mean, he's a good value where they got him, I guess. But I just think there are other wide receivers that were still available that they could have taken over him. Again, he's very fast. He could potentially be really good. And for all I know, the Packers scouting group is way better than just a casual person on YouTube.
Right? But I do think there's a chance that they start him off very with softballs, with slants and crosses, and run after the catch with a 4.37 speed. He's a burner, so you just got to get him to open space. You can do screens, you can do shovel passes, whatever. Just get him in space. And then also drafting a wide receiver was the Kansas City Chiefs. They draft Rasheed Rice at 55. Do we think that he could potentially be a top wide receiver for Patrick Mahomes?
They certainly like him a lot, or at least they're saying that they like him a lot, and they did take him in the middle of the second round. So that speaks a lot because that is high draft capital. I think he is more raw than Jaden Reed. I do like him. He was on my top list because I think he has a lot of traits that I really like. He is a vertical guy, so he will bring that element into his game, and I think that's a piece that they're missing. I think he could be eventually better than Juju Smith Schuster, but he has to put the work in. He's not going to be someone like Tyreek Hill. I don't think he has that kind of potential.
Come on.
Whereas, Flowers, who went earlier, has potential to get maybe close to a Tyreek. I don't think Rasheed Rice does, but I think Rasheed Rice could be a wide receiver two, maybe a wide receiver one. It just depends on how things shake out. But then again, if he can put up Juju Smith Schuster's numbers or better, then for all intents and purposes, that could be considered wide receiver one with that group. So
Absolutely. And the Dallas Cowboys drafted Luke Schoonmaker at 58. Is he the favorite to start the year as the one, or do we think it's Ferguson still?
I really like Ferguson, and I didn't think that the Cowboys needed to go after Schoonmaker at this spot. I don't know if Schoonmaker was going to get taken in the second round the way that it shook out. And I obviously, there's a tight end that I really, really liked that went very late. And I think he would have been a better pick. But Ferguson, they were very happy with Ferguson, but he could be an upgrade. I think Ferguson starts year one. I think Shoemaker probably takes over at some point, though,
We will
probably year two or three.
we will see. There was a quite a run on tight ends. The Jacksonville Jaguars also took one, Brenton Strange at 61. They also took Tank Bigsby at 88, running back. What do you think about Brenton Strange first?
It's a strange pick.
Ha 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 ha.
He was not really on my radar, so it's someone that I have to look into a little bit more. What I have looked into on him is he's more of a athletic H-back type. He's a raw route runner, a decent blocker. He could probably be a potential future starter, especially if they do not resign Ingram. He's not the same kind of tight end that Ingram is. Ingram is more of a the receiving tight end and less of a blocker. And Ingram put up pretty good stats, so it'd be a lot to ask for Strange to put up those stats early on in his career. But I don't really see Ingram as a long term answer at tight end, so I can see why they went after Strange. And I know that you like the two tight end system for them, that's what the coach likes to run.
Doug Peterson special right there.
Tank Bigsby. I don't think he immediately affects ETN. ETN is very electric. ETN does things that Tank Bigsby does not do, but Bigsby will probably be a change of pace back for him. He's a very good one cut kind of specialist. ETN has struggled with a little bit of health issues, so it is smart of Jacksonville to bring in another talented running back. I had hoped ETN wouldn't get any competition at all, and I'd also hoped that Bixby went to a different situation. But it's kind of somewhat similar to a lesser degree as the Seahawks with Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet. It kind of limits ETN a little bit, but at the same time, it might keep him healthy during the season, which is the most important element.
Agreed there. And I think that adding a back isn't always the worst thing, especially when there's not a for sure backup. And this kind of adds a little bit to that room and doesn't put everything on ETN shoulders. Speaking of a room that does not need anything more, the Denver Broncos added another wide receiver in Marvin Mims at 63. Thoughts?
We just don't know what to make of this wide receiver group. They talked about potentially trading Cortland Sutton and or Jerry Judy. They also have other talented wide receivers on the group. And Sean Payton then said, no, no, we're not looking to trade our wide receivers at this point. Well, he goes and he drafts Marvin Mims in the second round. That gives a little bit mixed signals. I know a lot of people like Marvin Mims. I'm a little bit lower on him than some other guys that were taken after him. But Sean Payton, if he picked him, he's going to want to use him. Maybe not exactly year one unless they trade somebody. This group is so crowded. I feel like they have five or six really good caliber wide receivers. And now I don't know where they shake out for dynasty values. I just know that for right now, for redrafts, you still have to go with Sutton as the number one and then Judy as number two until further notice, until there's more news.
Right. I think from a dynasty perspective, I think because the new coach used such a high pick on Mims. I think Mims has to be the preferred dynasty asset of the three.
I mean, he could bust and it could still be Sutton or Judy, but
Right, and they also have Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler, and they signed Marquise Callaway as well. So they have quite the wide receiver room.
I mean, they could roll with 6. That would be tough, but they could do it.
Who loses out on touches? And I know we don't have to answer that right now, but that's just a question to ponder. Like out of that room, who loses on touches? And I do think Hamler is someone that they would like to get rid of because I know that he had bad body language at times with Russ last year. And you don't need that with a quarterback in the locker room. You kind of move on from those guys because he's not really a superstar, and you just move on.
That would be the easy answer at this point. I don't
Ye-
think anyone's offering the value that they'd want to get back from trading one of their top 2 guys.
Agreed. So on to Sean Payton's old team, the New Orleans Saints. They drafted a running back, Kendra Miller, and A.T. Perry in the sixth. What are your thoughts on these two acquisitions?
It's a little bit confusing with the running back side, but I guess Kendry Miller is someone that's very highly rated. I know he was a little bit lower on my list than most people out there, but he is a good back. He's behind Kamara and Jamal Williams going into this year. I don't really think he supplants either of those two year one. The Saints are pretty good about bringing in running back prospects from the draft and sitting them behind veterans until they develop a little bit more and they move on from the veterans. I don't know if this is going to be the last year that Kamara's with the Saints. I don't know how this contract affects them separating from him. I know that if, for whatever reason, if someone was crazy enough to take Jameer Gibbs in front of Detroit, Detroit could have been a team that would have targeted Kamara via trade because it just lines up with the coach that they had. That's the one of the reasons why they got Gibbs was he reminded the coach of Kamara. So I don't think Kendry Miller breaks in right away, but he is a good dynasty stash. And I really like A.T. Perry. Him going at the 6th round is a steal, and he's better than a lot of wide receivers that were taken in front of him for certainty, in my opinion. He's someone that could be a future starter next to Olave after Michael Thomas is gone from the team, but I don't know if that's soon. That might be a couple seasons.
Agreed. I do think this is a Michael Thomas bounce back here. There was another team that was very wide receiver needy, and he may fly up dynasty boards because of that. Jalen Hyatt to the Giants at 73.
I like him talent wise. I know that I've had concerns with him with his route tree and being in that offense at Tennessee, where they were kind of like a funny offense where they just put up stats, but they didn't play a pro style. So I don't know if it's going to take a while for him to get the concepts down. But the thought is he's extremely talented, extremely fast. I think that they view him as a potential Julio Jones type at the top level, which is certainly what they're hoping for, but he kind of reminds me in some ways as Darius Hayward Bay, who is just a really, really fast receiver. He also reminds me a lot of someone who the Texans had, Will Fuller. So I think Will Fuller would probably be my base value for him with the upside of Julio Jones. I think the risk of him being Hayward Bay type is probably relatively low. I really like him in the Will Fuller range with the hope that he can be more than that.
I kind of agree with that, and we will see. But there is a need, and there is room on the depth chart to grow, and that's always a good thing.
The question is, Jeff, is he the best wide receiver on that roster right now? And I think you might have to say yes.
He might be. We'll have to see because I know that he started to build, and by he I mean Daniel Jones, he started to build chemistry with a few receivers last season. They also added Paris Campbell, so they have a bit on that team. Speaking of a team that you may not be able to move up the depth chart very easily or very quickly, Cedric Tillman to Cleveland at 74. So another wide receiver to that room, another young wide receiver.
Another Tennessee receiver back to back here. So
Uh oh.
yeah, so I like Cedric Tillman a little bit more than Jalen Hyatt just because he plays more of the X receiver role. And I like that role a little bit more than your typical Z field stretcher. but he's going to have a lot of the same question marks as Hyatt, whether or not he can adjust to a pro offense, whether he can show off a better route tree than in that system. Because, like I said, they run a wacky, very stat friendly offense at Tennessee. I think that he could develop into the wide receiver one there in the future. It just depends how long Cooper stays there and how long Cooper stays productive. Right now, going into the year, he's going to be behind Amari Cooper. He's going to be behind Peoples Jones. He's going to be behind Elijah Moore. So he's probably fourth wide receiver at best, which buys him time to work on his routes and adjust to the NFL and pro style offenses. So it's kind of a blessing in disguise. He's not going to be immediate use in redrafts, but he will be a decent dynasty guy to draft. The end of the second round, top of the third round, something like that is my guess for the rookie draft.
Absolutely. So we'll see if he can climb the depth chart, if the depth chart's even that hard to climb. We'll see if Watson takes another step forward. A lot of questions there. Moving on to a spot which actually might be a really good spot. David A-Chain goes to Miami at 84. Does he take over this backfield?
I don't know if it's year one. It's very interesting that Miami just seems to be bringing in the same running backs. So A Chain's very similar to Mostert, in my opinion. So they like to have the really fast running backs. Not a lot of diversity in that running back depth chart there, but he is one of your favorite running backs out of this class, which is very interesting because Roshan is one of mine. So who do you think has a better year between A Chain and Roshan?
I think A-Chain definitely does because I think that McDaniel really lobbied for A-Chain, and it seems like a guy that could take over that backfield, which is
Well,
weird to say.
we might have to come up with a wager for David A. Chain and Roshan Johnson at some point. That will be interesting. But he's electric. He's super fast. I think he's probably an upgrade over Mostert at this point in his career. It's going to be interesting because they're definitely trying to make the Miami offense very fast, very speedy, very electric. And that might be something that keeps them ahead of potentially the other teams in that division. So Miami might be a very, very exciting team this coming year, especially if their quarterback stays healthy.
Let's see. All right. So moving on to Pittsburgh Steelers. They drafted Darnell Washington, and I believe this was the tight end that you were alluding to earlier.
Darnell Washington's a very, very good tight end. He's a pass catcher and he's the arguably one of the best blockers in this entire class. He is now going to be a sixth offensive lineman for them, most likely. I think him, along with their first round tackle that they drafted, are going to be very good for Pickett and Harris's stock in the upcoming season. And I'm not sure if he immediately takes away from Pat Fryermuth in the passing game or not. I would definitely, if I was a Fryermuth owner, and I am, I would rather there not be another tight end at all to threaten him. But if I'm a Steelers fan, if I'm a Najee Harris owner, if I'm a Kenny Pickett owner, I am thrilled that Darnell Washington is there at Pittsburgh because he is a blocking beast. I think Pittsburgh got a steal, and I can't believe that someone who was talked about going at the end of the first round is there at 93. So he's probably going to make other people who drafted tight ends earlier look like fools. Looking at you, Dallas Cowboys. Any shade I can throw at the Cowboys. I think it's a really good pick for the Steelers. It might be more real NFL value than fantasy though for the tight end.
Yes, and we will see what the injury concerns were with Washington. There was a rumor that there were injury concerns that made him fall. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out about that along the lines. But moving on to the Arizona Cardinals, they selected a wide receiver Michael Wilson at 94. What do we think here?
The very next pick after Darnell Washington. I think he's also someone that might have gone higher but he had injury struggles in college and he wasn't in a very productive college offense. He's someone that I like the talent better than the production that he put up. And he's someone who reminds me very much of Michael Thomas coming into the league. I think he's a very similar body type. I think he's very similar skills wise. Just doesn't have the same production profile that Thomas had. I think he's a very good value in the third round for Arizona. We don't know how much longer DeAndre Hopkins is going to be there or if he's going to end up staying the rest of his contract. I don't know if Hollywood Brown puts up stats this year. I don't know if the other wide receiver that they have that everyone talks up, Rondell Moore, if he's going to put up stats this year. I think Michael Wilson slots in at the number 4 behind those 3 until any movement happens with those top 3. And I think he eventually has a starting role after Hopkins is gone from the team and potentially after Hollywood Brown is gone from the team. He could be the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 next to Rondale if Rondale turns the corner, or he could be the lone guy that remains from that group. I don't know. I really like him. He has a lot of potential, but he comes with a lot of risk as well.
Yeah, I think they're going to be going through some change. So we're just going to have to see what that change looks like as we move forward. I do think there's change coming to the Cardinals because I don't think that they are a very good football team as of right now. All right. The next team is a very good football team. The San Francisco 49ers. They grabbed Jake Moody at 99, a kicker, third round, and Cameron Latu, tight end, at 101. What are your thoughts on that? Kicker that early.
I always think of Rich Eisen saying kickers are people too. And I think it's hilarious that they took a kicker in the third round for a team that had very few picks. That was a very questionable selection, but they needed a kicker because they don't have one. At the same time, though, I don't see the value in taking a kicker unless he can make an 80-yard field goal. Woo, kicker! I bet everyone in San Francisco is super excited. Cameron Latu, I think, is someone that is going to provide maybe better real NFL value than fantasy. I don't see him doing much more than backing up Kittle. I don't think he's someone that if Kittle retired today would be a fantasy relevant tight end, despite maybe being the only real tight end there behind Kittle. I think they want to do more of a rushing attack, pass to running backs, pass to versatile wide receivers that they have. Of course, Kittle. But outside of Kittle, I don't really see them using any other traditional style tight ends. Kittle's kind of a tweener a little bit. So I don't really think these are that fantasy relevant, but it's always fun to talk about a kicker being drafted in the third round.
All right. And now we're moving on to some later round additions. We have Puka Nakua at 177 and Zach Evans at 215 with the Los Angeles Rams. Do you have anything on them?
I think that the Rams made the most of the limited selections that they had. I know they took Stetson Bennett a little bit earlier in the draft to back up Stafford. They brought in Puka Nakua, who is going to be potentially a wide receiver 3 or 4 for that team initially. And I really like him as a possession guy. I think he's someone who could surprise people in the NFL. He was in my top 20. I know I only did about 12 for you guys in the pod, but in my top 20, he was in there. I like him. I think he has good upside. Obviously, he wasn't as good as some of the guys taken in front of him talent wise, but he could be a sneaky addition for deep dynasties out there. Zach Evans is someone I really liked, and he was on my top 10 running backs. He was taken all the way in the 6th round. I don't think you really have to worry about what round he was taken in, honestly. And I think in that running back room, he probably will end up being the second back going into the regular season. And if Akers plays well, he'll stay the second back. If Akers struggles, I think he'll be the number 1 as soon as the following season.
Yeah, I mean Akers did finish the year strong last year, so let's see if his Achilles finally hasn't fully healed and he can kind of hit the ground running. He's still pretty young. If I'm not mistaken, he's still one of the younger running backs in the league because he was a pretty young rookie. So there is that. And we'll see if Akers, he's age 23 right now.
It's just the fact that his injury was an Achilles injury, and I know, and he came back so fast from it. It's hard for me to trust that he's fully healthy
He
and
was the
not a
man with
ticking
that.
time bomb.
Yeah, he was the man with that, though. That was awesome. That was awesome.
To come back that fast from an Achilles tear and play as forcefully as he did when he first came back was impressive. And he seems like he's getting some of his speed back. We'll see. We'll see if he can stay healthy. If his value stays low enough, he might be worth taking as a flex or RB2 with big upside if he can stay healthy. But I think Zach Evans might come into play as the running back for the Rams in the near future. So
That makes sense. We will see what happens with those two in a competition, and they also have Carrion Williams also coming back, but he proved to not be that big of a threat to the backfield. The Rams' backfield overall should be better this year going into the year. So, all right. So we have the New York Jets up next. They got Israel Abakanda.
Israel Abanikanda,
Yep.
I think,
Abani Kanda. Got it.
in the fifth round.
Yep.
He's he didn't make my top 10, but he is someone that people around the industry really like. They think he has decent upside. I think he's more of a backup, change of pace back behind Brees Hall. Michael Carter kind of concerned me last year. He didn't seem to be quite as quick. He didn't have quite as much burst as I was hoping for when he did play. So I think Israel could be his replacement, could supplant him as the number two back on the Jets. I don't think he threatens Brees Hall at all, though. So I think Brees Hall owners are safe as long as he's healthy. If something happened to Brees Hall, I think Israel and Michael Carter would probably split reps at the running back position. And I don't think it will be super fun for fantasy owners, but I think it was worth mentioning. And I think Israel could be a decent flex guy for dynasty owners in the near future, if not this season.
Yeah, I kind of see that as well. Also, the New York Jets grabbed Zach Kuntz at 220 in the seventh round. What do we think about him?
You know, in the previous episode, I really like Zach Kuntz a lot. I'm a little surprised he went in the seventh. I think he'll probably be the tight end of the future for the Jets. He may not be the tight end one immediately because Rodgers seems to have trust issues with tight ends or with rookies in general, unless he performs like a veteran right away. But I think he's a very good selection for the Jets. I think he's very high upside, and I think it was a very smart pick.
That makes sense. And then last but not least, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Sean Tucker, undrafted signing.
Yes, I really like Sean Tucker, and the only reason he went undrafted is he's had this mysterious medical issue where he was on the exemption list for I think the combine and for his pro day, and we don't know the details at all of what the issue is. If it's something that's not serious, this is a steal and a bargain pickup by Tampa Bay, who I don't think their running backs are solidified. I don't think that any of them have proven to be the lead guy as of yet. If you had to pick one now, obviously, I think it's White as their starter. But I think Sean Tucker, if healthy, is probably the best back in that locker room. So could be something sneaky for you guys to target in your dynasty leagues.
Yeah,
Just monitor his health news.
I don't see him overtaking White this year. I think that White showed enough last year to keep the job this year, but that number two job is open, and we always know number one goes down, number two is very valuable.
Yep, that's right. But that does it for our draft wrap up. Thank you so much for downloading or listening to this episode. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
As always, you can find us with our handle at N2EFantasy on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Please give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.